This is part 4 of the BIBBA improvement course for 2022. So far we've learnt the principles of what we're doing. In part 4 we will discuss producing the queen cells, distributing them once they're ready for distribution, and then finally the mating of the resulting queens. So how can we raise queen cells then? Well, firstly, as beekeepers, we really need to understand how bees do it. But even if we're not intending raising queens, beekeepers should know that anyway. Once we've done that, we can basically copy it. Obviously, we need to do a little bit of tweaking to suit us so that we're actually in control of the timing rather than the bees. That's all. There's nothing more to it. It really is quite simple. It's not difficult, and I'll be absolutely honest about that. It's just beekeepers who tend to make it difficult because they introduce all sorts of things which, quite frankly, many of them either aren't needed or they're over-exaggerated. All beekeepers should know that a colony of bees will build queen cells under 3 different impulses: swarming, emergency and supersedure. The swarming impulse is rather difficult to replicate, so we don't bother with that. The emergency impulse can be achieved by using a queenless colony. The supersedure impulse can be replicated by raising queen cells in a queen-right colony. So we generally use either one or the other. There is a third option, which is a combination, which many methods use. So what you do is you start the queen cells under the emergency impulse, usually in a queenless colony or with queenless bees. That is termed a starter colony, and a finisher colony is where the queen cells are finished under a supersedure impulse. There are several ways of doing it, and probably the best thing to do is have a look at the resource list that you've been given. Probably the easiest way of raising a few queens is by using a queenless colony, and that is what we will concentrate on in the practical element of the course. One of the easiest ways I know of making a colony queenless is to take the queen away from it. 7 to 8 days later, remove any emergency cells. In theory, there shouldn't be anything left after that that bees can raise queens on. But we need to be careful because occasionally bees can hold back a few larvae, and we can end up with emergency cells after that, which I will cover a little bit later on. We then introduce the larvae that we want by whatever method that we've produced them, and in theory they are the only larvae that the bees can raise queen cells on. But as I stated, it is possible that emergency cells will still be built. Again, as I've mentioned earlier, 2 to 24 hours later, check and replace any rejected larvae. You may be in a position where perhaps none have been accepted, or you could be in the lucky position where they've all accepted. It's handy to know early on what your rejection rate is likely to be, because you can then put it right. 1 to 2 days before emergence, that is probably 9 or 10 days after you've either grafted or you've put the larva in the colony. Go through the colony and remove any possible emergency cells. I say if any, because I've already mentioned that the bees can hold certain larvae back, and on several occasions I've seen emergency cells still unsealed 9, 10, 11 days even after the queen has been taken away. So you need to be aware of that. You can then remove the queen cells. Don't forget to leave one behind for the colony, because you want to bring that back into a queen right state. So if, let's say, you've got 7 queen cells available, 1 for the colony, so you've got 6 that you can use elsewhere. Distribute those 6 wherever you like, either with your own bees or perhaps with other beekeepers, or if you're working in a group, then other beekeepers. I suggest checking the emergence to make sure the queen has emerged. Obviously, if the tip of the queen cell is missing, then the queen has emerged. I suggest checking to make sure that she's got all the wings. So if you can see her, so much the better. This is a queenless colony that's had 1 frame removed to take a frame of larva. It needs to be good and strong like this. And I know there's quite a lot of things said that, oh, you must have young bees. Well, quite frankly, if you've got a colony as strong as that, especially if it's got supers on, then you've got all the resources that are needed. The colony can have supers on, and I've heard on many occasions that oh, you can't produce queens and honey in the same colony. Oh yes, you can, because I've been doing it for 50 years without any problems at all. So it's just one of these things, I think, that people say what they've heard elsewhere. It could be in Group B. Now, I haven't mentioned what I call Groups A and Group B yet. I will be doing that in video 5. But very, very briefly, Group A are the colonies that I'm happy to raise queens from, and Group B are those that I wish to replace the queens in. So you can use a colony that you're going to replace the queen to produce the queen cells. Why not? It's a good resource, and you know, you might as well use it while you've got it. So the queenless colony, as I've already mentioned, we are working on the emergency impulse. It's well suited for fairly small numbers, so not just small numbers, but small batches as well. It doesn't disrupt honey production because, as I've already said, you can still raise queens and produce honey in the same colony. What you do get, though, is a brood break, obviously, because you've taken the queen away. Now, if you've got a nectar flow at the time, you may increase your yield. And this is something that beekeepers should know, but very often you won't see in books. If you've got a nectar flow on and there's no brood, because brood, obviously unsealed brood, is very hungry, the bees will have got much more to store. So have a look at the weather forecast for a week or 2 in advance, and don't be frightened to add an extra super. Don't think you're going to cause any problems. You won't, especially fairly early in the season. You need no extra equipment at all, no swarm boxes or Marburg boxes or whatever that you might hear of elsewhere. It's just normal beekeeping equipment. As already mentioned, you can use colonies with poor queens, and that's one very good way of doing it, because you are requeening a poor colony at the same time. There's clearly no more lifting than normal inspection, because you've still got your supers on, the same number of supers, so you're not removing extra boxes like some of the methods where they work on a double brood box. You can use a swarming colony. There's absolutely no reason why not. But again, it's something else that I've heard many occasions. You shouldn't use a swarming colony for producing queens. Why on earth not? Because that's what they're doing anyway. And of course, they've they've obviously got the resources, and the bees themselves think they're in a prime condition to do so. All you need to do is to remove the queen cells, remove the queen, and away you go. Now these can be used for both starting the cells and finishing. So you just put the frame of larva in, and apart from checking to see how many queen cells you've got and removing emergency cells, that's really all you have to do. The great thing about this method is that several beekeepers can share. So if there's 3, 4 or even half a dozen beekeepers and they just want a queen or so each, then perhaps if one person does it this time and another beekeeper does it the next time and another beekeeper the next time, you can usually work quite well in a local situation. It's easily understood. There's nothing complicated about it, and basically what we're doing is little more than some swarm control methods. So there's nothing difficult about it at all. I find it works very well, and you usually end up with a good number of queen cells. Very rarely do I have failures. Now, with a queenless colony, I've found they'll only usually produce one batch. If you try to be a little bit on the greedy side and run a second through, I find the acceptance rate is quite a bit lower, perhaps 30%, something like that. Don't take my word for it, but it's not really worth trying to put a second batch through. I've told you that as what I think is probably suitable for beekeepers in the early stages. There is a shortcut, and I'm only suggesting it once you've got a bit more experience, because you can introduce larvae immediately after removing a queen, and I've done it on many occasions. Just take the queen away, put the larva in, and most colonies within an hour or so, the bees realise they're queenless, and then they'll start to think, if indeed bees think, they'll start to think that they need those larvae. You could leave it an hour or so if you like, but I find that this actually works quite well, and on demonstration situations I've done it on many occasions and had a pretty good acceptance rate. Of course, you will get emergency cells built, but you need to manage them, and I suggest that you remove them about 3 days later if you can, and then again after 8 or 9 days, because what you don't want to happen is an emergency cell emerge first, run round and kill all your good queen cells, or alternatively take a swarm out. It usually works well, and as I said, good acceptance. Another queen right colony, but I can only give you basic principles because there are several ways of achieving the same thing, and it's difficult to explain all of them. But really what we're doing is working on the supersedure impulse by raising our queen cells away from the colony own queen. This is because the pheromones are either reduced or there's none available. So the bees seem to think that there's a problem with the queen, and they carry on raising the queen cells. Now, if you set them up in a queen right colony straight away, they don't always build many queen cells. Much smaller numbers, probably 15, 20%, 30%, something like that, small numbers anyway. So what we do is find another way of starting the queen cells. And we can do that under the emergency impulse usually for about 24 hours, and then we carry on under the supersedure impulse, usually in 2 stages, one way or another. These are termed cell starter and cell finisher. Now, it can be the same colony. Often is, but some methods use more than one colony. So here is a basic principle. I'll explain it with supers and without supers. With most of these systems, you need to get the bees on 2 brood chambers one way or another. You keep the queen usually in the bottom brood chamber, and you put your larva for raising queen cells in the top box, usually with unsealed brood, to attract young bees up to the top box to work on your queen cells. And then to divorce those from the queen, you separate them by some sort of screen, a board, perhaps a queen excluder, and or supers. And that's the basic principle. So comments on the queen mite colony. As already mentioned, there are many methods. You need to understand what's happening, and I'm afraid some of the certainly the written material is quite complicated and daunting, but try and pull it apart. Even if you make up something yourself, perhaps on PowerPoint like this, so that you can understand what's happening, that will help you. Some of the methods assume a prolific colony. Obviously, if you put them on double brood chamber, unless you make it up from a single brood chamber, perhaps by bringing brood in from another colony, you may not have enough. It can disrupt honey production the way some people do it, but most will allow continuous queen raising, which is why they're used. So the bigger queen producers will use queen mite colonies, so more suited to large numbers. Already said that it's often seen as complicated. That I think is probably because of help from beekeepers, because they very often overcomplicate things. So what we're going to do on the course is concentrate mainly on the queenless method, just to get you folks started. As with many other areas of beekeeping, you need to take care. Your cell building colony should be prosperous so that you produce good queens. They need plenty of food to do it. That is both pollen and unsealed nectar. Pollen is quite important. Many queen rearers put a frame of pollen up close to where the bees are raising queen cells. The liquid food is more accessible by the bees if it's unsealed than if it's sealed. So if you can put a frame or half a frame of unsealed nectar, that will be fine. Needs to be strong in bees as well. Now, I've found that the colony size doesn't matter very much. What is important is the density of the bees on the comb. And I've seen many people try to raise queens in what they think are full colonies. Yes, there are bees on all combs, but they're very sparsely populated. If you can get your frames so that you can hardly see the brood because there are so many bees on there, that's really what you want. And it's probably better to raise queens in a strong five comb nuke than a poor full colony. If you use a smaller colony, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Not in my view anyway. I tend to allow about 1 queen cell per frame. So if I've got, let's say, a five comb nuke that's really strong in bees, it's bursting in bees, I'd be quite happy to let it raise about 5 or perhaps 6 queen cells. Now, in a nectar dearth, you may have to feed. I have to say that I've never ever fed, simply because I've made sure there's enough liquid food unsealed in my combs. But many people feed, and there's nothing wrong with that. I wouldn't criticise it at all. Now we've produced their cells, we need to distribute them. And this is, I think, best done about 1 to 2 days before emergence. So about 9 to 10 days after the larvae have been put in the colony to start the queen cells. Now, if you've got natural queen cells, you may not know the age of them, so I would be on the cautious side on those. The receptive colony must be queenless, so take the queen away, and that won't exactly make sure that they're queenless, because it's surprising the number of colonies that have actually got 2 queens, where there's probably a supersedure taken place and the beekeeper hasn't known. Also, if you've got a virgin queen there, that's no use either. So you need to know the history of your colony. You need to leave it several hours before putting a queen cell in. Otherwise, what could happen is the bees think, well, we've still got a queen, even though she's been taken away. There's still pheromones going around, so they'll chew it down. In that case, you need to either leave it several hours. Now, how long? Well, I think a couple of hours is normally okay. But for somebody just starting, I would suggest probably a minimum of 6 to 8 hours. If not, you can protect it. If you've got emergency cells, such as you've taken the queen away 4 or 5 days or several days before you want to put your queen cell in, you will have emergency cells if, of course, you've got larvae there. You need to take those out. And then, of course, record what you've done. That is probably one of the things that many beekeepers don't do. Record where the queen cells have come from, or even where they've gone. Now we get to queen mating. It's a personal view, but I think it's much better if queens are mated where they're going to be laying. Of course, that is not always possible when you're producing large numbers, because you tend to get queens mated in smaller colonies and then requeen the larger colonies. But if you can do that, it does reduce the dangers, because queen introduction is, in my experience, is nowhere near as reliable as it used to be. Very, very rarely used to have any failures, but now we seem to have a lot more. And of course, it saves you and the bees time as well. So what are our options for getting our queens mated? Well, full colony, a standard frame nucleus, and when I say standard frame, I mean normal hive frames. A small standard frame nucleus, which I've termed a 2-frame nuke. All of these 3 I will be describing a little bit later. Also support colony, which I've already discussed, which really I think we can include in the standard frame nucleus. Also mini nukes. There are several proprietary types, or perhaps homemade ones that beekeepers have made themselves, and I'm one. I've got my own. These tend to be perhaps made out of wood. Now there are some problems with mini nukes, and they're much more of a specialist nature than the others, and we won't be concentrating too much on them during the course, and I won't be describing those in part 4. So the full colony is probably most likely for small-scale beekeepers. So perhaps you've got 10 colonies or less. You might want to requeen 1, 2, perhaps 3 colonies. Then just take the queens away and put the queen cells in there. In my view, queens mate well, probably as good as anywhere. Fewer failures than I find in the smaller units. There is no queen introduction, so that cuts out one possible problem. It's probably the safest for somebody who's starting out, and probably in a teaching situation, perhaps in a local beekeeping association, teaching apiary is probably the safest way, and probably easiest way to encourage beekeepers to raise their own queens. Now, it may increase the honey yield for the reasons that I've mentioned earlier, because of course you get a brood break if you get a good weather for the next week or two and nectar flow on, then I should certainly add one empty super. The standard nucleus, and when I say standard nucleus, I mean standard size frames, perhaps 3 to 5 frames, or the support colony that I mentioned earlier. In my view, queens mate really well in these, and it's probably not a bad option for a beekeeping association. What you can do is leave the queen there until the brood is sealed, or even emerged, because you can check to see that all the brood is worker brood rather than drone. But in my experience, if the queen is laying a good pattern, it's likely to be worker brood than drone brood. If you're interested in the colour of your bees, or your workers rather, then you can leave it until a brood emerges. So leave it over 3 weeks, and then you can check, and if the queen isn't producing what you want, so perhaps she's got mismated, or in your terms mismated, then of course you can dispatch her if you want to. Now queens can be left as long as you like, really, so the colony can build up if you want to, either turn it into a full colony, or perhaps keep milking off nukes. There's all sorts of things that you can do when you're queen rearing, loads of options. Now in my experience, they can become congested very quickly. One of the reasons is because you've obviously got no supers, so if you've got a nectar flow on, because you've got a brood break, you've got a high proportion of foraging bees, they can absolutely fill up a nuke box fairly quickly. So of course when the queen gets mated, there's nowhere for her to lay. And of course with a standard frame nucleus, there are loads and loads of other uses. You can use them for requeening, or queen mating as we're doing here, or perhaps just increasing your number of colonies, or making up for winter losses before they happen. Now the 2-frame nuke, which is something I've used for over 40 years, and I suppose I gave it the term. A lot of people have told me that 2 frames just isn't big enough, and it needs to be more than that. Some of them quite openly too. But I've spoken about this on many occasions, and I've had so many beekeepers come to me and say, yes, it works, they've done really well, and they can actually build a number of colonies up quite quickly. Now, I'll give you one word of warning. If you go online, look for a 2-frame nuke, what you may come up with is an American 2-frame nuke, which is not the same thing. What they mean is a small box that just takes 2 frames. So they're very, very different things. So please don't get confused. How do I make it up? Well, one frame of food, which could be like that, or complete food. It really doesn't matter. Um, it can come from any colony. There's, as you can see there, there's usually very few bees on food combs. So if you want to, you can just shake the bees off, and then you add one frame of sealed brood with the Deering bees. When I say sealed brood, I mean largely sealed. It doesn't all have to be sealed, but if it's sort of 3/4 or more sealed, that's absolutely fine. And when I say Deering bees, I mean as populous as that frame there. So you can only just, if you do see the brood underneath, you can only just see it. It needs to be strong, because of course you need bees to look after what unsealed brood there is. Right, that's basically it. That's all the bee element. Fill it up with a drawn comb, depending on the size of your box. I find that a five frame box works really well with this system. It is economical on bees because every colony, especially in the early part of the year, can afford one frame of brood and one frame of bees, and in some instances it might ease the possible swarming situation. So these nukes will build up quite quickly, and certainly will be full colonies fairly soon. They do have many uses, and if you see the BIBBA video or the Dave Cushman's website, you'll see a lot more information about them. I would certainly recommend these to any beekeeper. So there you are. That's what you've got to be looking for on the BIBBA website. Now, to put nukes out for queen mating, you don't need anything expensive. You don't need anything special at all. Most of mine are on makeshift stands, just like this. These are plastic items that one of our members gave us, 10, 12, might even be 15 years ago now. They were apparently used in the forestry industry and thrown away. Well, we were given about a dozen of them, and they work really well. Keep the nuke off the ground, and it's nice and easy for the returning virgin queens. Well, returning queens then. You can use all sorts of things. You can use bottle crates, although please make sure that they don't belong to somebody. If you do acquire them from the skip, then I think that's fair enough. But I've seen all sorts of things used, like bits of 4x2 wood balanced across things like concrete blocks. I've seen scaffold poles used, all sorts of things. Make it simple. If you put them close together like that, I suggest that you put them facing different directions, so that the queens, when they come back, don't get confused. And one of the issues of raising queens in batches is that when they go out to get mated, they tend to go out at roughly the same time, same day, or a day or two apart. And of course, what happens then is the bees call the queens back, and they might go into the wrong hive. So make it easy for them. This is the Whisper Green teaching apiary with our queen rearing element at the bottom. You can see in the background some of the full colonies. You need to keep the queen mating nukes away from everything else if you possibly can. Make the entrances face different directions if you possibly can, because then that makes it easier, and there's less chance of returning queens going into the wrong hive. Put them in the shade, because small units, especially mini nukes, can get overheated very, very quickly, and with mini nukes that could result in absconding. With a normal standard nuke, the bees tend to come out and cluster on the front, presumably to try and shade the hives themselves. Make sure there are plenty of markers. This is fine because there's trees and of course there's other hives as well. But if you put them on a featureless area, such as perhaps a mown lawn or a concrete area, then put one or two other things, old wheelbarrows, buckets, old bins, all sorts of things like that, so that you're helping the queens on their return. Keep them away from the full colonies, because when you handle a colony, of course the bees are fan outside the entrance for a little while afterwards. If there's a returning queen from an adjacent colony comes back, she might mistake the bees that are fanning outside the hive that you've handled for her own. Also, you may be a marker that was there when she went out, or when she comes back, and she could get confused. I suggest not inspecting colonies with virgin queens in between perhaps 10 and 6, 10 in the morning and 6 in the evening. I know that might sound overkill, but let's just give the queens the best chance. They're expensive to produce, and we don't want to do something daft to wreck our program. You need to keep an eye on the food, because the smaller the colony is, the more vulnerable it becomes. Sometimes a week or so of bad weather and they can be on the point of starvation. But a few days of good weather and nectar flow, they can be absolutely packed out with food. So just keep an eye on the food, probably more than you would for a full colony. So that's it. Thanks very much for watching part 4, and look forward to seeing you in part 5.